let's talk about my favorite horror reads of 2023. So I read about 35 books this year, which is not as much as many of the other people on BookTube, but I was lucky I read any of that because it was just a hard year for me. I feel like I wasn't really in the reading mood. There were a lot of books that I started and just stopped reading because I just couldn't get into it, but there are a few that really stood out to me and surprised me, so I'm excited to talk about them. The first book on my list is Episode 13 by DiLouie. This one was basically a book written entirely for me. It's about a paranormal investigation crew who's investigating a haunted house, and it's a found footage-esque book. I love found footage and I love paranormal ghost shows, so this was just right up my alley. This one was just filled with mixed media and stuff, so it was super fun to read, where you're reading emails, you're seeing transcripts from the show, and you're getting like a first-hand view of everything that this crew is experiencing. And because it's found footage, you kind of get the sense that things are going to go wrong, because in found footage, the footage gets found when people die at the end and they just miraculously find it. So I had so much dread while reading this, and I was like on the edge of my seat trying to figure out what happens. I feel like there's a lot of the paranormal show lingo throughout here, so that was fun to read. I think the story gets very trippy and weird towards the end and super claustrophobic, and I just loved it. I devoured it, and I don't really remember what happened at the end, but overall the journey was just so much fun for me. It was like as above, so below, and God, I loved it. I loved it so much. So that prompted me to read more from DiLouie, including Suffer the Children, which I also loved. This is basically a almost like vampire-esque story where the world's children just suddenly start dying, and it's told from the perspective of the parents. So it's really emotional and heartbreaking and absolutely terrifying. A parent's worst nightmare. All these kids start dying and they don't know why, but then they learn that the kids can be resurrected or kept alive with blood. And the world just starts going crazy. People are running low on blood. People start going to crazy lengths to get blood to feed their children. And it highlights just how far a parent is willing to go to keep their loved ones / children alive. It was really sad. It was really heavy. The parents were a little bit annoying at times, but once I got into it, once the horror kicked in, the moment where all the kids start dying is one of the most horrifying, just gut-wrenching moments ever. And you put yourself in their place, like, holy crap, if that happened, I wouldn't be able to survive. I would just be like, take me too, please, thank you. Another book that I didn't even have on my radar, but then I saw it and I was like, it sounds perfect for me, Mr. Magic. The cover, TV, love that look, bright pink, pulled me right in. And then when I learned it's about a show, a popular TV show for children that is seemingly weird and can't be found, but a lot of people remember it, and there's some weird vibes going on. So it centers on this woman who, she experienced something weird as a child, and her dad basically took her away from something, and they've had the feeling that she's been on the run this whole time. So she doesn't really know a lot about her past, but she knows something bad happened, and she thinks that she's responsible for a horrific accident that happened in her childhood. Her dad dies, and at her funeral, these kids from her past show up, and they're like, hey, we're so glad we found you. We've been looking for you everywhere. We're having a reunion. Because turns out they were all a part of this TV show where this guy named Mr. Magic was like this kid show host, and they were all a part of it, but she can't remember a damn thing. So she joins them to find out about herself and her past, and it is a trippy, weird, wild ride. Weird is the best way I can describe this book. It's very much a liminal horror feeling. It's like creepypasta, and it's very reminiscent to Candle Cove. Not as scary, and I feel like some people might say a lot doesn't happen in this book, but there was just something pulling me, a magnetic force that just was like drawing me to this book, and I could not put it down. There was just a weird vibe and feeling, and I needed to find out what was happening, and I just felt uneasy the whole way through. And I don't really know what happened toward the end, but everything leading up to that, it was just so unsettling, so atmospheric and creepy. And I guess it's about deconstruction, but I didn't get that. But it makes sense after you read the book and you're like, oh, okay. And it's about these kids who just dealt with abuse in their childhood and how they're overcoming it and all that stuff. And it was just really unique. I loved it. Another book I had no intention of picking up but ended up loving, The September House. So this is a haunted house story, and I'm a little sick of haunted house stories at this point because there's an abundance of them, especially in the last like year or so. So I was like, no thank you. But I started seeing people talk about it on TikTok. This is the best haunted house horror story I've read in like years. I was like, okay, I'm intrigued. So does it live up to the hype? Yes, it does. So this is about a woman who moves into her dream home, but the only problem is it's haunted. And every September they go through this like haunted mania where all the ghosts in the house go wild, buck wild, and there's blood dripping down the walls. They're just present at all times. And this woman has learned to live with it because this is her dream home and there's nothing gonna stop her, especially a little ghost with its head bashed in. And another thing, her husband has left and her daughter calls and she's like, Mom, what the hell's going on? Where's Dad? And she comes back home to help find him. And that sets a wrench in this woman's plans because she comes back during September and she doesn't want her daughter to know about this stuff because if she does, she thinks her daughter will make her leave. This was so fun, so like just creative and completely unexpected. It was a breath of fresh air. I love that the book spends no time showing you the haunted house. Like we don't have to go through, oh, is it haunted? Is it not? Boom, right in with the hauntedness. This woman knows it's haunted and she introduces us to all the spirits who you quickly get to know and learn about. And it's easy to remember what they are and what happened to them, despite there being so many, and just how she has learned to live with them. And she also like goes back in time and explains how she first met them, and she delves deeper into the history of the house. And there's a serial killer who once lived there, and he's pretty messed up and scary. And it's just so unique, and you know something big and sinister is happening. And towards the end of the story, the ending just blew me away. I was like, this all stems on the ending. If they can just land the ending. And it was so, there were twists in the end. It goes one direction, makes you think it's gonna be something else, and then it twists in another direction, and I'm like, okay. And just the end felt so powerful and emotional, and I loved it. I loved this character. This story is about abuse and trauma and getting through that, and it's just interesting to see that this woman has gone through so much hell before living in this house that it made living in this house of hell a breeze. Like she was like, I can handle anything. And just how she has so much patience with the dead, and she's just a mom, and just her strength as a woman to deal with all this. It was just so interesting to read, and the hype is real. I loved this one. Then I picked up Black Sheep, which was my last read of the year. Loved it. I love Rachel Harrison. There's just something cozy and fun and warm and inviting about her writing. Her books are so easy to read and get into, and I love that her characters, her female characters, are flawed. They're not like perfect, everybody loves them kind of characters. They're characters who are a bit cynical. They are very sarcastic. They're a little unlikable, but there's reason for it, and you learn about this woman's life. She has escaped her family, her religious family, and she receives an invitation to a wedding of her cousin and former childhood boyfriend one day, and she heads back home, and that sets off hell in her life, basically. And I like this because it subverts our expectations of what a religious horror is supposed to be, and the character is just so interesting, and I loved watching her deal with her trauma and deal with these people. And it just highlights how you can't really escape your family. They're always going to be there, but you don't have to live by their rules. Like, you don't have to live by your destiny. You can choose your own destiny no matter what. And this one had some really fun moments, some surprising moments, and I loved every minute of it. Rachel Harrison, you are an auto-buy author for me now, and I love you. Also read Nestlings by Nat Cassidy, which is described as Rosemary's Baby meets Salem's Lot. Perfect description of it. So this is about a couple who is more on the poor side, who win this apartment lottery to live in this luxury apartment building, and something's off about this apartment. It's weird. Like, it's beautiful, but there's like no other neighbors around, and the neighbor across the way is going through a lot of stuff, and our main character is just coming off of a traumatic event. She's a new mom, and she's struggling. She's struggling with being a new mom, with loving her daughter and adjusting to this new space. And her husband is also adjusting with being a caregiver, moving into this new place and feeling special and wanted. And this apartment building changes their lives forever, and it's filled with some creepy stuff. There's some really creepy moments in this, and I love the mystery, the backstory of this building and the characters we get to meet. I think it's an interesting take on the vampire story. It's a Jewish version of this vampire mythology, which I thought was interesting. I've never read that before. And overall, it's a slow burn, but I was interested the whole way through. I found it fun. There were some moments that just were really surprising to read. There's some gory moments that were really cool and fun. And overall, I had a blast with this. It's very much reminded me of Rosemary's Baby. I love apartment settings, and I feel like they used the apartment setting perfectly, where it just feels like its own thing. It feels like a character in itself. So this was really fun. I'm interested to read more from Nat Cassidy. I also read You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight, which is basically a story about this young teenage girl who works at this summer camp that reenacts scenes from a famous horror movie that was shot there years prior. And one night while they're going through their performance, people start actually dying. And she looks into what's going on, and she fights back. She's a survivor. She's a final girl. And I just had so much fun with this. The main character and the other characters that she's friends with are so funny. This book balances humor and heart perfectly well with the horror, and I was just devouring this book. I think it's just perfect for slasher fans, but the story also kind of grows a little bigger than that towards the end, and I just thought it was fantastic. I loved the references to horror. I love that our characters are kind of self-aware of the horror genre, like Scream, and it was just so much fun. I also read Candy Cane Kills by Brian Mcauley, who's also the author of Curse of the Reaper, which I also read and loved. This is a Christmas set slasher that is bonkers, and it is such a blast. It's about this family who stay at this cabin in this weird town in the middle of nowhere on Christmas Eve, and they soon discover that this cabin is home to a really horrific accident that happened like 10 years prior, where an entire family was murdered. And everybody in the town thinks it's this person, this killer known as Candy Cane. And Candy Cane comes back for vengeance. And when you learn about Candy Cane and the backstory of what happened, it's so insane and absurd. It gave me Black Christmas from 2006 vibes. It's just over the top, silly, bloody, and gory. It's such a fun slasher with great characters and messaging, and it's just so much fun, especially for Christmas. But I think you can enjoy it any time of the year, especially as we go into the winter season, so I really wanted to highlight this. I also read The Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson, which is basically a Carrie retelling for the modern day. Thought it was fantastic. It was a great way to modernize the story, where this character is a young black girl who's basically been living as white her whole life, and then one day she discovers that she's black, and so do all of her classmates, and it just kind of sets a trajectory of things for the rest of the story once everybody realizes that she's black, and she becomes close to this boy who's also black, but he's a jock, and he's kind of assimilated with his white friends, and it was just an interesting dynamic between them as they're getting to know each other, and I thought that they handled all of that really well. It was a really unique way to tell the story, and then it all leads up to a gigantic horrific event that we know in Carrie that takes place at prom, but this one almost felt like bigger than what happens in the Stephen King's Carrie. But overall, I thought it was a great modern retelling of Carrie. I loved it so much, and I think all of you will love it, especially if you liked Stephen King's Carrie. I also read Piercing by Ryu Murakami. Loved it so much. It is such a twisted love story in a way about these two people who come together. So it's about this guy who has this urge to take an ice pick and to his child, but he doesn't want to kill his child, so he finds a woman of the night to act out his fantasy on her. But when he meets her, he realizes she's just as messed up as he is, and it's a story about trauma and abuse and how childhood abuse and stuff that happens in your life can affect you later in life and affect the things that you like. And it's just so insane to watch these two people come together and play off of each other in crazy ways. It's disturbing, it's unhinged, and I loved every minute of it. The Last Word by Taylor Adams was another fun one this year. It's a fast-paced thriller about a woman who leaves a negative review for a writer who then comes to kill her for it, and it's such a fun cat and mouse game. The lead character is fantastic. I loved the isolated house setting, and it was a lot of fun. So there you have it. Those are my favorite horror reads of 2023. Let me know if you've read any of these, what your thoughts are. Let me know in the comments what your favorite horror read of 2023 was, and what books you have on your radar for 2024. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you next time. Bye.